Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am delighted to have with us Jesse Lee. Jesse has done just about everything in Democratic politics. He's worked for Nancy Pelosi, he's worked for Barack Obama, he's worked for the DCCC, and he is a terrific voice of common sense and insight when it comes in particular to messaging and democratic communication. So welcome, Jesse. Thanks so much for making time.
No, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this big, ugly bill that's coming down the pike. Democrats have actually done a pretty good job convincing the public this is a terrible thing and the public doesn't like it. Why is it then that Republicans seemingly feel emboldened to keep going down this road?
Well, it's ironic. I think it's less that they feel bold and less and more that they feel terrified and desperate because what happens if they don't pass anything is that actually relative to the status quo, people's taxes go up. And it's not a massive amount for middle class families, much less for working people, but for their donors it represents a massive tax hike. And so that is the last thing they can afford to let happen. And, the reason we're in this situation is because the last Trump tax cuts, which cost, about $2 trillion, would have cost a lot more if they had paid for them through the entire decade. But instead, they're sunsetting early, and now they're kind of having to pick up the slack for having kind of short-armed it last time. And so now we're looking at anywhere between 3 trillion and 5 trillion for this. And that's added to the debt even after all of the cuts to Medicaid and food stamps and clean energy production, et cetera.
Right. Now, sometimes Democrats have been so successful, they've actually been able to wave Republicans off. That happened in 2017 when they tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And sometimes it's a matter of just punishing them after the fact, as it was with the first tax bill that Donald Trump passed in the first Trump term. What makes the difference? How can Democrats actually increase the heat enough to dissuade them in this case or change the bill so radically? Or is this just a matter of setting up 2026 so these people can be punished and run out of office?
No, well, as we're speaking, the Senate Finance Committee is starting to kind of leak out the first drips and drabs of what they're going to do.
Right.
And I think the very early indications are that on clean energy, at least, which is the first stuff that's coming out, they are going to move in a slightly more reasonable direction now. Devil's in the details to say the least. But what we were looking at on the clean energy side was a situation where you could have had hundreds of thousands of jobs destroyed under the House bill. And, that's a lot of people, but even more would have been affected by, skyrocketing utility bills. I mean, we're already seeing, all of the headlines of utility bills going up across the country right now, in part because Trump has been tearing down clean energy wherever he can find it by executive action. But if you were to pass the House bill, I mean, you would just be absolutely cratering America's energy supply. 93% of the new energy on the grid last year was wind, solar, and batteries. So if you take that out of the equation, and at the same time as you have this skyrocketing demand from AI and data centers, I mean, you're going to be talking about, just hundreds and hundreds of dollars more for, every family, not just the ones that missed out on a clean energy job.
Right. And from what I've seen from information that Center for American Progress and others have put out, that hits red states. And that's kind of the ongoing theme that all these things they're doing, Medicaid, which of course funds not only people in rural America, but rural hospitals, or whether you're talking about SNAP, all of these things really hurt in red America. Are they just betting that people will forget or that somehow they're going to escape the wrath of their voters?
Yeah, well, you referenced the ACA repeal fight, and in a lot of ways, I was very involved in that. In a lot of ways, this has felt very deja vu.
Yeah,
The big difference is, like I say, they have to pass something. They have to extend the Trump tax cuts, or it'll just be total meltdown. But um, uh, what happened there was the House passed a hyper extreme repeal bill and
right,
a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're not going to take health care away from your own people, are you, House Republicans?" And they're like, "Yeah, oh yes, oh yes." But then when it hit the Senate, a lot of people remember John McCain's big thumbs down, but actually. He only did that after, 10 other votes had failed
right.
where, actually there were about 10 other Republicans, people
Yeah,
like Tom Cotton, where, Medicaid insured a quarter of the state from the Medicaid
right,
expansion under ACA. And, people like Shelley Moore Capito, who is, I think, figuring fairly prominently in this vote because she has a lot of clean energy jobs and she has a lot of people on Medicaid again.
right.
And so, I think you're raising the right question, and it really remains to be seen. I mean, like I think there are people who really, really don't want to do that. It's just a question of whether they can kind of hang together. And I think what, Senate Republicans are saying to the House is, hey, I'll tell you what, how about we not kick everybody off Medicaid, and how about we keep some of these clean energy tax credits? And if you're so concerned about the deficit, how about we not spend $500 billion on salt? And
Exactly.
because they don't care about salt in the Senate amongst the Senate Republicans, and I think they're going to kick that back to the House, and they're going to be like, "You still want to lecture us about the deficits?"
Right.
And I have to say, I'm not exactly sure how they get out of that. I think they were really hoping that the Senate would stay somewhere close to the House, and they would be able to just kind of kick it over the finish line here quickly by July 4th. We all heard that deadline. And right now, I think they're looking more like they'll hope to get the Senate alone done by July 4th. And then the month of August will be just a giant brawl between the two chambers, with, of course, the debt ceiling being the big source of
Exactly.
leverage backstop where they're both trying to hang that over each other's heads and saying, no, you have to fold because, the whole economy is going to
Right.
implode. And,
Right.
you look at the investors around the world, bondholders and everybody's just going to be like, oh man, this is getting even worse. So,
Exactly. Exactly. Now, just between you and me, because we don't want them to hear about this, there would be a very sane solution to all of this, which is you leave Medicaid alone, you leave SNAP alone, you leave green energy alone, and you only prevent taxes going up for the vast majority of Americans. I don't know, up to 400,000, something
sure,
like that.
sure.
But Republicans cannot bring themselves to do that. Is that because kind of the crazies are in charge of the House, or is that really the donor, the dark money problem that they simply are owned by the super rich?
Yeah, I mean, I think really starting the last Trump term, especially, the Republican Party just became, I almost think of it as, it's just a burger restaurant and tax cuts for the rich are the burgers. If you stop making burgers, suddenly what you don't even have, what do you have anymore?
Right? Who needs them? Yeah.
Right. And everything else is just kind of window dressing and along for the ride and ways of paying off different constituencies to kind of get there. But, that's the burger, is the tax
Right.
cuts for the wealthy. And, the moment they say, well, we're not doing that anymore, no, well, now nobody's paying for your ads, nobody's paying for anything. So,
Yes. Yes. So, as I said, the Democrats have been, I think, unusually disciplined in really emphasizing the healthcare part of this. Why has that been able to penetrate, and why have people kind of figured out what's going on here? What have Democrats learned over the last few years in terms of really focusing on healthcare, which it turns out, Republicans are concerned about too?
yeah, it's interesting. It was kind of a big surprise during the ACA repeal fight that, as popular as protections for pre-existing conditions was, the thing that really kind of broke the back of the Republicans trying to repeal all of this was the Medicaid expansion. And, I think there was a popular perception of, well, actually, people don't like Medicaid. They don't like giving money to poor people, et cetera, et cetera. But, I saw AP poll just from a couple hours ago saying that, actually a majority of the country thinks that Medicaid is underfunded. And I'd said a total of 2 out of 10, said that it was overfunded. And, SNAP for, food stamps, as it's commonly known, was not far behind that. And, people do just have a basic appreciation of, hey, little kids, especially who are, growing up poor, they need health care and they need food, like more than
Right,
a billionaire needs another tax cut for sure.
right,
And yeah, I mean, you really, if you kind of cobble all of these various things together, um, it'd be hard to really pull together a more unpopular set of proposals than what you have here. I mean, you're in a cost of living crisis, and the most they have to offer right in this bill really is, well, we won't let your taxes go up. We won't do a tax hike on you. But in exchange, we have to gut Medicaid, gut food stamps, cause your utility bills to go way up by attacking American energy supply. And by the way, all of that for a low, low bargain price of $3 trillion dollars of debt. And it's like,
right.
ah, that is really,
That's a
that's really
loser.
ugly,
That's I got a glimpse of John Thune today, and I guess I got to give them credit for their just innate capacity to lie. He was on Fox and he was asked, well, the Committee for Responsible Budget, which is a very conservative group, they don't like spending money, they don't like unbalanced budget, said, the debt is going to go up trillions of dollars. And he said, no, this bill is going to lower the debt. No one believes that. Why does he say it? And does anyone believe it? Or it's just like whatever to get through an interview, they just say this completely ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll say is it's unfortunate that I've seen that kind of pushback come up on Fox News from time to time, but it's really it's an unusual occurrence. And the truth is, a lot of them have just decided, well, we're going to stick to Fox News, we're going to stick to Breitbart, we're going to stick to the Laura Loomers and the rest of the new White House press corps. And that'll be enough, maybe. And, in those places, you can say that. And maybe
Yeah,
they'll even say it for you. Um, but, the idea of locking arms and nobody says anything different, Rand Paul, you get kicked off the island. And, I think to some extent it has served them well. It's a lesson that they have very much learned from Trump is,
yes.
he has forced them into a discipline of everybody tells the lie, nobody breaks from it, and now it's just he said, she said.
Yeah, exactly. So, last question I want to ask you. There are a whole bunch of Republicans in the Senate who are going to be up for reelection, and not all of them are in safe states, if you will. We got Susan Collins. You got Tom Tillis. You've got people, even Joni Ernst now may not be in such a safe place after suggesting, everyone dies.
Uh,
So who cares if we cut Medicaid? Is there enough pressure from those states on them to make them nervous enough to back off? And if so, how did Democrats do it? Who from those states are the right people to say, Tom Tillis, you're going to be out on your ear if you don't figure out a way to get rid of this stuff?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I look at the difference between Medicaid and the clean energy tax credits, where, one of the biggest tells that I think doesn't get enough attention is that they enact in the House the Medicaid cuts the month after the midterms. What does that tell you about what they think people are really going to think about this,
Yes.
Whereas, the clean energy tax credits, they didn't seem to think through so well because really the way the House did it, you would start to see these factories kind of abandoned and shuttering projects, and
Right.
whole communities are already being kind of built up around these giant billion-dollar investments. I mean, $1 billion, let alone five different billion-dollar investments in a congressional district. I mean, that's remaking the economic future of that district.
Yeah.
But you would start seeing those right away. And I think in the same way, the thing that is tricky for them is for the Tom Tillises of the world and Susan Collins and Joni Ernst is the bill takes a similar approach to the Trump administration of just overwhelming you with horrors. So much so that yeah, you try to, plug the hole on one and another one's popping up. And, I think the question for them is Tom Tillis could lose his seat either on Medicaid or clean energy, right? He could easily, uh, you know, get run out of office. And so how does he stop both, right? And I think that is where it's going to be interesting to see how they land because ultimately, as you say, I think you could very easily lose those three seats if Trump remains unpopular and the opposition is far more motivated. And now your margin is getting pretty uncomfortable, right? And set aside the House, which is on its own kind of kamikaze mission, but um, it does start to get kind of uncomfortable for them, and they just need to figure out how to stop it. And that's why I think what you're seeing right now is the Senate saying, well, okay, maybe we chill out a little bit and we just do salt instead. We just get the money from there. And how's that sound? Um, and it's why it actually might not be so easy for these guys to come to a common ground in the kind of remaining weeks that they have. If you think about the debt ceiling mid-August and the Senate doesn't finish till mid-July, that means they have a month to kind of reconcile these like existential differences. And
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, it gets me worried whether they're going to be able to raise the debt ceiling.
Right. Right. And I would leave with one thought, and that is they can ignore, reality just so far. They saw 5 million people out there in the streets peacefully protesting. They've got to see that the momentum is building on the Democratic side and that they could talk about an existential moment. They could face some serious losses in 2026. So I think Democrats, combination of message discipline and turning up in large numbers, as you know, is usually a pretty good thing in politics. Usually you come out ahead when you do those two things. So let's see if they can keep it up and we'll keep tuned. So thanks so much, Jesse. We really appreciate having you.
Anytime. Great to see you.